The hum of the engines was almost hypnotic, a steady drone that made it easy for passengers to drift between wakefulness and sleep. In seat 9A, Emily Ward's head leaned against the window, eyes closed, fingers curling around the armrest like a lifeline to her quiet morning. She had booked this flight under a pseudonym, in part to escape recognition, in part to escape the ghosts of her past. Once she had been Emily Ward, a decorated Air Force combat pilot whose name carried respect and fear in military circles. Now she was just another traveler trying to convince herself that normal life had value, that leaving her past behind was possible. The flight attendants made their routine announcements, voices bright and practiced, as the passengers settled into a rhythm of sleep, tablets, and soft conversations. Somewhere near the rear, a child whimpered. Emily's eyes opened briefly, the sound threading through her mind, tugging at a reflex she'd learned to suppress long ago, the need to protect, to act, to respond when danger was near. She forced the instinct down, telling herself she wasn't on a mission today. She was on a plane headed across the country, nothing more, nothing less. Then, without warning, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I need to ask if any combat-trained pilots are on board. Please, if you have experience flying military aircraft, report to the front immediately." The words sliced through the cabin like an electric current. Coffee cups wobbled. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A murmur rippled down the aisles, passengers exchanging glances, eyes wide with confusion, fear, and disbelief. Phones were pulled from pockets. The chatter of "what's happening? Is this a joke? Are we safe?" filled the space. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Her body froze, every muscle tightening as a long-buried adrenaline switch flicked on. Combat trained. That wasn't a phrase casually used on commercial flights. She blinked, trying to shake the weight of memory pressing against her skull. The roar of engines, the rattle of gunfire, alarms she had learned to obey instantly. A lifetime of split-second decisions flashed in her mind, and she felt an old, familiar pull, the pull to step forward, to act, to take control. The passenger in front of her nearly dropped his phone, startled by her sudden movement. She unbuckled with calm precision, leaning down to secure her bag with the efficiency of someone trained to move under pressure. Every step toward the cockpit was measured, confident, eyes scanning the cabin with instinctive alertness. She noticed the tension on faces around her, the seatmate in 9B clutching a blanket, a man in 10C gripping the armrest like it could anchor him to life itself. Some had already begun murmuring prayers, others quietly panicking, and a flight attendant hovered near the cockpit door, phone clutched tightly to her chest. "Ma'am, are you a pilot?" the flight attendant asked, voice tight with worry. "I was," Emily said, voice steady, almost too calm. The words felt strange leaving her mouth. She had avoided them for years outside of military settings, but now they carried weight, purpose. "Combat trained, I can help." The attendant's eyes widened. "Yes, please go now, the captain needs you." As she approached the cockpit, the cabin seemed to shrink around her, the walls vibrating with an invisible tension. She passed passengers frozen mid-sip of coffee, others staring through windows at the dull, pre-dawn sky, unaware of the life-or-death drama unfolding mere steps away. She reached the cockpit door and paused, hand on the frame, feeling the familiar hum of electronics, the smell of recycled air, and something else, a tension she had only felt when entering the cockpit under fire. Inside, the scene was chaotic but controlled, a paradox she understood all too well. The first officer was sitting rigidly in his seat, pale, hands gripping the yoke as the captain leaned against the side console, sweating, voice strained. Alarms blinked across the panels, red and orange lights flickering like flames trapped in glass. "Emily, thank God," the first officer said, voice trembling. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this stable. Systems are failing, altitude, airspeed, hydraulics. It's not making sense." Emily's mind kicked into high gear, scanning instruments, cross-referencing readings, noticing anomalies that would have been invisible to anyone less trained. The engines sounded irregular, a deep growl under the usual drone. She could feel the aircraft's weight shift subtly with each movement of the wings, turbulence magnified by whatever damage had been inflicted. "Step aside," she said firmly, sliding into the jump seat beside the first officer. "Talk to me. Everything start from the beginning." The first officer rattled off a series of warnings, fluctuating readings, and emergency protocols. Emily's eyes darted from screen to screen, her brain calculating, prioritizing, predicting. Some instincts were muscle memory, flaps, rudder trim, throttle adjustments, but others required a mental checklist she hadn't run in years. She could see the tension in the captain's posture, the subtle tremor in the co-pilot's fingers, and she realized instantly that this wasn't just a systems failure. Something had gone seriously wrong, something that would test every ounce of skill she had. A sharp warning tone rang, loud and insistent. Emily's stomach tightened. Cabin pressure, fuel anomaly, she had to see for herself. "How long can we hold this altitude?" she asked, voice low but precise. "Not long," the first officer admitted, his hands still trembling. "We're losing airspeed, altitude's inconsistent, and something's wrong with the hydraulics. The controls lag. I don't understand it." Emily swallowed a sudden surge of fear. The words "I don't understand it" were dangerous in her experience. They meant the aircraft was unpredictable. Unpredictable was deadly. She looked past the instruments to the windshield where faint sunlight barely pierced through the clouds. A quiet dread settled over her, but her voice remained steady. "We're not done yet. Keep your focus on the yoke, follow my commands, and trust me." The flight attendants outside had noticed the shift in tone, the authority in Emily's calmness. Murmurs of panic softened into tentative hope. The passengers began looking at one another, sensing that something critical had changed without understanding why. Emily glanced down at the first officer, reading fear and trust intermingled. She knew that the next few minutes would demand more than just flying skill. They would demand every bit of courage she had, every ounce of mental clarity, and every flicker of experience she thought she had buried when she left the military. She took a deep breath, hands tightening on the controls, muscles coiled like springs. She glanced back toward seat 9A, remembering where she had been just moments ago, sleeping, safe, oblivious. And now here she was, about to face a situation where hesitation could mean disaster. "Let's move," she said quietly but with a gravity that commanded obedience. "Tell me exactly what's happening, step by step. Every detail counts." The cabin fell into tense silence, passengers sensing something monumental was about to unfold, though none could imagine what. Outside, the clouds shifted, gray and ominous, like a warning of the trials ahead. The engines hummed louder now, almost in protest. Emily felt it in her chest, a blend of fear, adrenaline, and determination she hadn't known she'd missed until this very moment. She leaned forward, eyes scanning panels, lights, and instruments, preparing for the unknown. She had no idea what she would find next, only that she could not and would not fail. A sudden alarm shrieked, a high-pitched, urgent note that pierced the cabin walls and raised hairs on arms and necks. Emily's pulse surged. She exchanged a brief, urgent glance with the first officer, who swallowed hard, then nodded. "Brace yourself," she said. "This is about to get worse." And in that heartbeat, the plane shuddered violently, a warning that the situation had escalated far beyond anything they had expected. Emily gritted her teeth as the jump seat trembled beneath her. The shudder that rattled through the aircraft was no ordinary turbulence. It felt alive, unpredictable, as though the plane itself resisted her command. The first officer's hands shook violently on the yoke, eyes wide, trying to follow the instincts she hadn't realized she had until now. Alarms screamed in chorus, a chaotic symphony of lights and beeps that threatened to drown them in panic. "We're losing altitude faster than predicted," the first officer shouted, voice almost breaking. "Hydraulics are lagging. Aileron response is delayed by at least 2 seconds." Emily's mind raced, parsing every detail. Systems could fail in ways textbooks didn't explain, especially when multiple issues compounded simultaneously. Her training in combat situations snapped into place like an emergency override. Flight wasn't about comfort or smooth landings anymore. It was about survival. Every ounce of her past experience demanded focus, decisiveness, and control. "Listen to me carefully," Emily said, voice low but unwavering. "We're going to stabilize this aircraft step by step. Forget smooth. Forget routine. We're in emergency mode, hydraulics lag, compensate manually. Watch airspeed, altitude, and trim constantly. We adjust together." The first officer nodded, barely breathing, letting her take the lead. Emily's hands moved with muscle memory she had thought lost. Switches flicked, throttle adjusted, flaps recalibrated. She called out numbers and corrections, the aircraft trembling like a living beast under her touch. Outside the cockpit window, gray clouds churned like storm-racked seas. The faint glow of early dawn did nothing to soften the violence. Turbulence tore at the plane's body, the wings flexing under forces that would have snapped ordinary aircraft. Emily's stomach sank with the realization. If the wings failed, nothing in her training could save the passengers. "Cabin, prepare for turbulence," she said over the intercom, keeping her voice calm but firm. Passengers braced, eyes wide, some gripping seats so tightly their knuckles whitened. A child whimpered again, a sound that tightened Emily's chest, sparking the instinct she had struggled to suppress. Protect at all costs. The first officer tried to stabilize, but the aircraft seemed to have its own agenda, responding sluggishly to every input. Emily's pulse surged, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. They weren't just fighting mechanical failure, they were fighting a race against physics itself. She scanned the instrument panel, her gaze locking on an odd fluctuation in the altimeter. Altitude readings aren't matching. One says 30,000, another 29, and the cabin sensors show 31, she muttered. Something's seriously wrong. The first officer swallowed hard, fear creeping into his voice. "What do we do?" Emily paused. Her fingers hovered over the yoke, a subtle shift of muscle memory telling her to trust her instincts over instruments. She had faced instruments that lied under combat stress before. She knew the plane's behavior could tell more truth than the panels. "We fly by feel. Keep your hands on the yoke, trust my inputs, follow my commands, and do not deviate. This is going to be rough." Suddenly, another alarm blared, an engine warning, a fire indicator. She wasn't sure yet. The warning lights blinked aggressively, red screaming against gray cockpit walls. Her stomach tightened. An engine failure at this altitude could push them into a rapid, uncontrollable descent. Emily's eyes flicked to the first officer. "I need you on checklists. Manual hydraulics, emergency power systems override everything. Can you do that?" He nodded, sweat beading his forehead, hands trembling. "Yes, ma'am, I can." "Good, keep it steady," she said. Her own palms were slick with sweat, but her grip on the controls was iron. She adjusted the throttle, felt the wings flex under her touch, sensed the aircraft's subtle resistance. She remembered the first time she had flown in combat, jets skimming cliff edges, every second a life-or-death decision. The feeling came back, a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. Below, passengers were holding on. Some had stopped speaking, eyes fixed in shock. Others whispered prayers or hugged the person next to them. Emily's thoughts flicked briefly to 9A, her empty seat before she moved forward, the symbol of a life interrupted by duty. She swallowed, forcing her fear down, channeling it into precise action. Then, through the static of the radio, an unexpected voice came. "Flight 482, this is air traffic control. We're reading unusual system behavior. Please confirm your status." Emily responded quickly, summarizing the chaos with calm authority. She had to sound confident for them even as the aircraft continued to shudder violently under her hands. "We are experiencing multiple system failures, engine fluctuations, hydraulic lag, and inconsistent altimeter readings. requesting emergency vectors to nearest airport capable of handling large aircraft under emergency control. The controller's voice was steady but tinged with disbelief. "Copy that. We're clearing paths and preparing emergency services. Do you require additional support?" Emily's heart skipped. Additional support? That could mean fighter escort, military emergency crews, something far beyond what civilian aviation normally provided. She filed it away for later. For now, her focus was simple: keep the plane flying. Then came a new, subtle problem: fuel levels. One gauge dropped sharply, then another, then the third. It didn't match calculations, didn't make sense. The engines were consuming fuel faster than physics allowed. A cold panic swept over her chest. They were running out of options faster than they were running out of fuel. "Check fuel lines manually," she ordered. "Cross-verify, something's off. Tell me every number as you see it." The first officer did, voice cracking under tension. The numbers confirmed her suspicion: a leak or sensor malfunction compounded by the turbulence. Every second spent analyzing, every minor correction, had a price. Altitude was bleeding away, and the weather outside was turning against them. "Cabin, brace for potential severe turbulence," Emily said, keeping her voice calm, careful. She knew the announcement would frighten the passengers but also keep them from panicking mid-crisis. The plane rocked again, violently this time, throwing luggage from overhead bins. A coffee cup spilled and someone screamed as it hit the floor. Emily barely registered it. Her entire world had shrunk to instruments, controls, and the faint tactile feedback of the aircraft through the jump seat. Her eyes darted across panels, measuring every flicker of warning light, cross-checking with instincts she hadn't realized were still sharp. A new worry gnawed at her mind: structural integrity. Turbulence alone might not have caused this level of instability. Something else had stressed the aircraft, maybe damage she couldn't see, a component already weakened. She had to assume the worst while hoping for the best. "First officer, prepare for manual stabilization. We may have to descend rapidly to safer altitude. Maintain heading but adjust for control lag. I need total compliance," she said. Her voice left no room for argument. He nodded, shaking but resolute. Emily's presence, even in crisis, inspired trust. For a moment, she allowed herself to notice that, how strangely comforting it was that people still relied on her instincts, even in situations she hadn't anticipated in years. Outside, lightning split the horizon. The storm they had skirted before was now upon them, black and roiling, rain slicing past the windows in a jagged blur. The engines roared against the wind. Alarms screamed over her shoulder, and passengers gripped seats in prayer, fear, and disbelief. Emily felt the tension in her own chest mirror the tremors of the aircraft. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced. Every scenario she could imagine, engine failure, wing damage, fuel loss, ticked in her brain like a timer. She could not afford hesitation. A single mistake now could turn a crisis into catastrophe. And then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic groan from the wing. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't imagined it. That groan carried through the fuselage, subtle but unmistakable, a warning of possible structural compromise. Every instinct screamed at her. They were closer to disaster than anyone realized. Emily's eyes met the first officer's, wide and terrified. She spoke softly, but with authority that brooked no argument. "Prepare for emergency descent and approach. This isn't routine. Keep calm, follow my lead, and stay alert. We're not out of danger yet." The cockpit fell into tense silence, the storm outside tearing at the fuselage like an invisible predator. Passengers gripped their seats, whispers of fear spreading cabin-wide. Emily's hands tightened on the controls, her jaw set, eyes locked on the instruments, waiting for the next alarm, the next threat, the next moment that could decide life or death. Somewhere beneath the roar of engines and wind, she felt it, the thin line between survival and catastrophe. And she knew, instinctively that the plane's secrets, the faults, the failures, the invisible dangers, were only beginning to reveal themselves. The first officer swallowed hard, bracing as Emily leaned forward. The storm, the failing systems, the aircraft itself, everything converged on the moment ahead. "Here we go," she whispered. And with that, the aircraft lurched violently again, a violent reminder that their fight for control was only beginning. The metallic groan reverberated again, this time louder, shaking the jump seat beneath Emily's hands. She pressed forward instinctively, eyes scanning every instrument, listening to every subtle vibration of the fuselage. The storm outside roared, rain slashing across the windows like knives, lightning illuminating the tension etched on the faces of passengers just beyond the cockpit door. Every flicker of light, every alarm, every tremor carried a single message. They were no longer in routine airspace. They were in a battlefield of weather, machinery, and chance, and she was the only one trained to fight it. "Altimeters still fluctuating," the first officer shouted over the alarms, voice cracking with fear. "We're reading anywhere from 29,000 to 32. I can't keep a stable reading." Emily's gaze narrowed. She had dealt with faulty instruments in combat situations, planes she had flown with systems deliberately sabotaged or damaged by hostile fire. This was eerily similar, but now the stakes were civilian lives. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the aircraft could become a tomb. "Focus on feel, not numbers," she ordered. "Trust the aircraft. Listen to it. Every vibration, every shudder is telling you something the instruments are." The first officer hesitated, fear battling trust. But years of following procedures and instinctive reactions weren't gone. He let her guide him. Emily leaned into the yoke, her knuckles whitening. She adjusted the throttles with precise micro-movements, felt the aircraft respond, and realized that, despite all the chaos, the plane was listening, to her touch, to her instincts. Suddenly, another alarm blared, a warning she hadn't anticipated. The fuel indicator dropped sharply again, this time synchronized with a subtle sputtering from the engines. "Engine 2 is fluctuating, we're losing thrust," the first officer shouted. Panic threaded his words. Emily didn't flinch. She had survived far worse in deserts and mountains where lives depended on split-second decisions and nerves of steel. Her hand flew to the engine controls. "Feather it if you have to, but keep it steady. We'll compensate. Nothing else matters until we stabilize." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, the illumination revealing the storm's ferocity. Rain battered the fuselage with unrelenting violence, wind shear threatening to tip them sideways, turbulence making the aircraft buck like a wounded animal. Emily could feel every micro-shudder through her hands, her seat, her spine. Every part of her training screamed that they were on the edge of disaster, but she couldn't allow herself to acknowledge it. She couldn't think about falling. She could only think about control. "Cabin, stay calm," she said over the intercom, voice calm and deliberate. "Secure yourselves, fasten seatbelts, and brace for turbulence. We're in emergency mode. Do not panic." Some passengers whispered prayers, others gripped armrests so tightly their knuckles shone white in the dim cabin lights. The child from 9B whimpered, head buried in a parent's shoulder. Emily's heart clenched for a moment, but only a moment. She had no time to indulge emotion now. Action demanded focus, and focus demanded suppression of fear. The first officer followed her orders, adjusting controls, cross-checking gauges. Emily noticed a pattern emerging. Fuel fluctuations corresponded with extreme maneuvers the plane couldn't fully compensate for. She realized with a sinking feeling. Turbulence had damaged more than instruments. Something structural had been compromised. "Cabin pressure?" she asked sharply. "Stable but fluctuating," the first officer replied. I think the fuselage is under stress too. The readings aren't reliable." Emily's pulse jumped. Unreliable readings, stressed fuselage, fuel anomalies, engine sputters. This wasn't a simple emergency. It was a cascading crisis. and the storm was relentless, as if nature itself was testing their resolve. She leaned forward, scanning every panel, every gauge, every subtle vibration. Memories of combat missions flooded back, enemy fire tearing through wings, instruments lying about altitude, fuel burning faster than anticipated. Back then, she had survived by instinct, by reading the aircraft as if it were alive, by trusting what her body and experience told her over what instruments said. "This is not standard," she muttered. "We're dealing with multiple system failures and structural compromise. We're going to have to fly manually, anticipate every anomaly, and adjust constantly. Do you understand?" The first officer nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I understand." Emily took a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the rhythm of the aircraft through her hands and feet. She adjusted the throttle slightly, nudging the nose up to stabilize their altitude, feeling the wings flexing under strain. Outside, wind tore at the fuselage, but the plane held. For now. Then came another warning, subtle but terrifying. A vibration from the wing, uneven and irregular like metal tearing against metal. Emily's stomach dropped. This wasn't just damage, they were on the verge of structural failure. "Brace for severe turbulence," she said again over the intercom, calm but urgent. "This may feel worse than before. Remain seated and fasten belts. Keep your heads down." Passengers gripped seats, praying, whispering, and holding their children close. Emily felt their fear, a tangible weight pressing against her resolve. She couldn't fail them, not now, not ever. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the storm in stark white brilliance. Rain hammered the windows, wind bent the fuselage, and the plane shuddered violently. Emily adjusted her grip on the yoke, heart pounding, muscles tense, mind firing calculations she hadn't consciously realized she remembered. "Throttle adjust for turbulence. Keep the nose steady. Don't overcorrect," she instructed. Every movement, every calculation was crucial. The plane responded slowly, but it responded. The first officer kept calling out instrument readings, trying desperately to match her commands. Emily ignored some numbers she knew were misleading. She felt the plane's behavior beneath her hands, every shudder, every tremor, every resistance. The aircraft was communicating, she just had to listen. Minutes felt like hours. The storm pressed from all sides. Fuel warnings flashed. Engine sputters came in staccato bursts. Structural groans echoed through the cabin. Passengers clutched seats, eyes wide, faces pale, unaware of the precision and control Emily exerted just to keep them alive. Then through the static of the radio, a new voice, military. Clear, calm, yet laced with recognition. "Flight 482, this is the NORAD combat station. We're monitoring your flight. We're aware a combat-trained pilot is aboard. Assistance is available if needed." Emily froze for a heartbeat, the name of the station echoing in her mind. NORAD, military jets, support, but she didn't have the luxury of waiting. The storm, the systems, the aircraft itself demanded immediate action. "Understood," she replied, voice calm but tight. "We're managing a multi-system emergency. I'm taking manual control. Keep us clear of nearby traffic and stand by." The first officer swallowed, glancing at her. Trust, fear, and relief mingled in his eyes. Emily didn't let herself think about that. Focus demanded singular attention. The plane lurched again, violently, every alarm screaming in unison. The storm was relentless, unyielding, and the structural groan from the wing grew louder, more pronounced. Emily's stomach dropped into her feet. This was beyond anything she had faced in civilian flight, beyond most combat missions she'd flown. This was survival, the raw, uncompromising edge of life and death. Her fingers tightened on the yoke. She leaned into the vibrations, into the metal, into the chaos, feeling the aircraft's heartbeat through her own. She was awake, alive, and completely responsible for everyone on board. Somewhere beneath the roar of wind and engines, the aircraft whispered a truth she recognized instinctively. Survival depended entirely on control, anticipation, and courage. And Emily Ward had both. But as the plane bucked again, violently, a subtle, terrifying realization struck her. The storm and the aircraft weren't the only threats. Something else had begun to emerge, something hidden, something that could turn a desperate situation into outright catastrophe. She glanced at the first officer. "Brace yourself, things are about to get worse." And with that, the aircraft lurched violently once more, sending a shudder through the fuselage that rattled the jump seat. And the story of survival, courage, and raw human instinct was only beginning to unfold. Emily leaned into the yoke, the aircraft shuddering under her hands like a wounded animal. The storm outside clawed at the fuselage, wind tearing at the wings and rain hammering relentlessly against the windows. The groaning of metal was no longer subtle. It echoed through the cabin, a menacing reminder of how close they were to structural failure. Each vibration, each shudder, screamed at her. Any misstep could turn this emergency into catastrophe. "Altitude's dropping faster than expected," the first officer reported, voice strained. "Hydraulics are still lagging. I'm fighting it with everything I've got." Emily's jaw tightened. This wasn't just turbulence. It was a combination of multiple system failures compounded by structural compromise. The engines were sputtering, fuel gauges were erratic, and the altimeters contradicted each other. It was a nightmare scenario, one she had prepared for in theory but never faced in reality. "Listen to me," Emily said, voice calm but commanding. "We're going to descend to stabilize. Keep the nose level, follow my inputs exactly, and prepare for manual adjustments. This is going to feel violent. Brace yourself and don't deviate from my commands." The first officer nodded, gripping the yoke with white-knuckled tension. Emily felt the aircraft's subtle responses through her hands, the flexing of the wings, the vibrations transmitted from the fuselage. She could read the plane like a combat veteran reading enemy movements. Every shudder, every quiver told her something about what was failing and what could still hold. "Cabin, brace for emergency descent," she said over the intercom. Her voice was steady, authoritative. "Remain seated, fasten seatbelts, and secure yourself. This may be rough." Some passengers began praying, some clutched their children, some gritted their teeth in fearful anticipation. Emily didn't allow herself to dwell on their fear. She could only act, only control, only survive. The first officer adjusted the throttles as she instructed, and the aircraft began to descend, slowly at first, then accelerating as the storm intensified. Lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the churning clouds, rain slicing across the windows like 1,000 invisible blades. Every gust threatened to push them off course. Every alarm screamed a warning. Emily's eyes scanned the cockpit constantly. The altimeter fluctuated wildly. Engine 2 continued its sputtering. Hydraulic pressure lagged, making rudder and aileron adjustments feel delayed by an agonizing fraction of a second. But she compensated, micro-adjusting throttle, trim, and yoke input, guiding the aircraft as though it were alive. "First officer," she said quietly, "prepare for asymmetric engine thrust. Engine 2 may fail completely. We'll have to compensate manually. Cross-check everything." The first officer nodded, panic barely hidden behind concentration. Emily felt the tension in the cockpit radiate outward, her own pulse racing, hands tight on the yoke, muscles coiled. Every instinct she had learned in combat surged forward. Adrenaline sharpened her vision, focused her mind, and forced every calculation into action. Suddenly the plane shuddered violently to the left. A metallic groan followed, louder than before. Emily's stomach dropped. She recognized the sound, structural compromise in the wing. The turbulence alone wouldn't have caused this. "Brace for violent maneuver," she said over the intercom. "This is not a drill. Stay down and hold tight." Passengers screamed or gasped as the aircraft tilted, the storm forcing it sideways, the damaged wing straining under forces it shouldn't endure. Emily countered, micro-adjusting the controls, forcing the aircraft back toward stability. Each adjustment was precise, calculated, and brutally exhausting. She could feel the first officer watching her every move, trusting her instinct over instruments that were now clearly lying. Outside, lightning illuminated the chaos. Clouds churned like a stormy ocean, and the dark silhouette of the horizon barely pierced through sheets of rain. The runway at the nearest airport, a distant hope, was still miles away, obscured by storm and darkness. Fuel warnings flashed. Engine sputters persisted. Structural groans threatened every second. Emily realized that the descent alone was a test of endurance, skill, and nerve. Any sudden gust, any misjudgment, and the aircraft could become uncontrollable. "First officer, communicate with ATC," she said. "We need vectors for an emergency landing. Priority. Emergency crews ready. And request immediate fighter escort if possible. I may need assistance on approach." The first officer relayed the message, voice steadying under Emily's calm authority. Emily continued descending, micro-adjusting the controls with precision. She had to anticipate every gust, every stress point, every quiver of the damaged wing. One wrong move could spell disaster. The storm intensified. Turbulence shook the plane violently, and passengers screamed again. Emily felt a pang of guilt as she realized she couldn't reassure them beyond her words. She was not a comforting presence here, she was the line between survival and catastrophe. Then came the realization. They were approaching a critical altitude. Too high, and the storm would continue to batter them with uncontrollable force. Too low, and obstacles on the ground, trees, terrain, weather, could become fatal. The decision was terrifying but necessary. "Lower further," she commanded the first officer. "We need to stabilize before we attempt approach. Keep all controls ready for manual override. I need complete attention." The first officer obeyed, hands moving as instructed. Emily adjusted throttle and trim with micro-precision, guiding the aircraft down through turbulent skies, dodging lightning and heavy rain, every adjustment a battle against the elements and the plane itself. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration warned her that the structural compromise was worsening. Her stomach tightened. Every instinct screamed. They were dangerously close to losing a wing, but she refused to panic. Fear had no place in control. Only action, only precision, only survival. "Cabin, brace for more turbulence," she said. "Remain calm, remain seated, hold on to each other." Passengers gripped seats, some praying, some whispering to loved ones. Emily focused on the instruments and the feel of the plane through her hands. Every quiver, every shudder was a message she had to interpret instantly. The runway was still distant, but radar and ATC provided guidance. She calculated the remaining fuel, factoring in engine sputters, high drag from turbulence, and fuel anomalies. They were cutting it dangerously close. Every second mattered. "First officer, monitor fuel and engines constantly," she said. "We can't afford surprises. Manual trim on wings if needed. Be ready to override autopilot completely." The plane lurched again violently, and Emily felt the stress in the fuselage increase. The storm was unrelenting. The damaged wing groaned, warning of potential failure. But she held control, micro-adjusting every motion with nerves of steel, training, and instinct guiding her through impossible conditions. Minutes stretched like hours as they descended through the storm. Outside, lightning illuminated the churning clouds, showing the violent beauty and danger of nature's fury. Inside, passengers clutched their seats, praying silently, unaware of the delicate ballet of control unfolding just feet away. Emily realized something crucial. Their survival depended not just on technical skill, but on anticipation. The aircraft wasn't just a machine, it was an extension of her mind and body now. She felt the subtle shifts, vibrations, and resistance, anticipating structural weaknesses and compensating before they could threaten control. Then came the subtle shift of hope. The storm began to thin slightly. The first break in clouds revealed the faint glimmer of ground below. Emergency lights on the runway reflected faintly against clouds, a distant promise of safety. But there was no room for complacency. "First officer, prepare for approach," Emily said. "We may be able to attempt landing soon, but conditions will be tight. Manual control required. Stay sharp." The first officer nodded, face pale but determined. Emily glanced back briefly at the cabin, fear and hope mingling in the faces she couldn't comfort. She forced herself to look forward, focusing on the runway and the task at hand. The storm was receding, but the aircraft was battered, systems still failing, and the structural integrity of the wings uncertain. Every adjustment now would test limits. Every moment was critical. Emily's mind raced with possibilities, calculations, contingencies. She knew the descent wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a harrowing approach. The runway ahead was their only chance, and she would have to push the limits of skill, instinct, and courage to reach it. She exhaled slowly, tightening her grip on the yoke. The first officer mirrored her focus, hands poised, eyes wide. Outside, the storm churned, lightning still flashing, rain still lashing. Inside, the aircraft groaned and shuddered, but it was still flying. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the full weight of responsibility. The lives of every passenger, every crew member, rested entirely in her hands. "Here we go," she muttered under her breath. And with that, the aircraft lurched again, violently, as Emily prepared to make the decisions that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Emily's stomach clenched as she leaned over the instrument panel, eyes darting from gauges to yoke, reading every subtle vibration in the fuselage. The metallic groan had grown louder, more insistent, a warning she could no longer ignore. She reached instinctively for the throttle, her fingers adjusting minutely, feeling the wings flex under every gust of wind. Turbulence tore at the aircraft like an angry sea, but the worst part was the realization that something structural had given way. "First officer," she said, voice tight but steady, "look at the left wing. There's stress near the root. I think it may have torn partially during turbulence. If it fails completely, we won't have time to react." His eyes widened and he swallowed audibly. "Can we still stabilize it?" he asked, voice trembling. Emily exhaled sharply, pushing fear down into focus. "We have to. We adjust manually, counterbalance thrust, maintain strict altitude control. Nothing else matters right now. Are you ready?" He nodded, hands gripping the yoke like it could anchor him to survival. Emily felt the weight of responsibility crushing yet clarifying. Every micro-adjustment, every decision, every calculation she made now could mean the difference between life and death. Outside, the storm intensified again. Sheets of rain hammered the windows, lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaotic dance of clouds and wind. The aircraft groaned under the strain, wings flexing perilously. Emily adjusted the throttle on engine 2, which was sputtering inconsistently, while monitoring fuel levels that continued to drop erratically. She realized that with every second they were burning through their slim margin for survival. "Cabin, remain calm," she said over the intercom. "This is an emergency descent and approach. Fasten your seatbelts, secure yourself, keep calm and trust our instructions." Some passengers whispered prayers, others clutched hands or children, gripping the seat in front of them like it could anchor them to safety. Emily's heart clenched for a brief second as she saw their fear, but there was no time for panic. She had to act, and she had to act perfectly. The first officer called out updates. Hydraulics lagged, engine 2 sputtering, fuel low, altimeter inconsistent. Emily ignored the numbers that she knew were lying. Instead, she relied on instinct, the feel of the plane beneath her hands, and subtle vibrations transmitted through the fuselage. She could read the aircraft like a living being. Every shudder, every flex told her something the instruments couldn't. "Throttle asymmetry," she muttered. "Engine 2 might fail completely. We'll compensate with Engine 1. First Officer, prepare for manual override of hydraulics. Trim adjustments every few seconds. Anticipate flexing of the left wing." He nodded, barely breathing. Emily could feel his trust and his fear. She focused inward, shutting out the chaos outside, the screams and prayers from the cabin, the storm that threatened to rip them apart. For her, there was only one thing: control. Total, uncompromising control. The aircraft lurched violently as the storm ripped at them, and the metallic groan of the wing grew sharper, like metal crying under pressure. Emily's stomach dropped. This was the moment she had feared, yet had prepared for her entire career. She adjusted the throttle and yoke, counteracting every movement of the wind, every flex of the damaged wing. Microseconds became lifetimes. "Altitude check," she said, voice tight. The first officer called out fluctuating numbers, none of which matched reality. Emily ignored them. Instead, she read the aircraft, feeling every tilt, every vibration, every response as if it were a heartbeat. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the storm's ferocity. Rain lashed the fuselage in relentless sheets. Emily adjusted for crosswind and gusts, micromanaging the yoke and throttle to stabilize the aircraft despite structural compromise. Engine sputters continued. Fuel burned at erratic rates, but for now, the aircraft held. Then the first officer pointed to a subtle visual. A small panel near the wing root had torn further, fluttering violently. Emily's pulse spiked. That small panel was critical. The wing itself was under extreme stress. She had seconds to adjust, to compensate for the potential of catastrophic failure. "Prepare for extreme maneuvering," she said over the intercom. "We are still airborne, but structural compromise is worsening. Keep seated and brace." Passengers gripped seats, some crying, some holding children. Emily didn't allow herself to notice. They couldn't help her now. She adjusted the trim and throttles, micromanaging the controls, predicting the plane's response before it happened. Every gust, every flex of the wing, every shudder was data she used instantly. Minutes felt like hours. The storm showed no mercy, winds howling, turbulence tossing the plane like a rag doll. The groaning from the fuselage intensified. Emily's hands burned from tension, muscles taut, mind calculating constantly. Fuel levels continued to fluctuate wildly, yet she refused to glance away from the yoke for more than a fraction of a second. Then came a moment that froze time. The left wing flexed sharply, a violent shudder coursing through the fuselage. Emily's heart jumped. "Counterbalance now," she said sharply. "Throttle adjustments on Engine 1. Trim manually every 2 seconds. Follow my commands to the letter. This is the crucial moment." The first officer obeyed, hands moving quickly but precisely. Emily could feel the plane responding, resisting the storm, resisting gravity, resisting destruction. But the warning was clear. They were at the edge of structural limits. "Cabin, hold tight," she said again. "We are managing a serious emergency. Stay calm, remain seated, brace for turbulence." Lightning illuminated the sky again, revealing the violent swirl of clouds and wind. Rain hammered the fuselage. The engine sputtered, fuel warnings flashed, and the groaning of metal continued. Emily felt the aircraft respond under her fingers, minute adjustments keeping it aloft despite the failing systems and storm's wrath. Minutes passed, stretching endlessly. Emily adjusted the yoke, micromanaging the controls, reading the flex of the wing, anticipating the aircraft's response before the instruments even registered. The plane bucked again, violently, threatening to roll, and she countered instantly, muscles straining, adrenaline sharpening her senses. "First officer," she said, voice calm but urgent, "we are approaching critical altitude. Runway visibility is low, crosswinds high. Prepare for a short approach. Maximum focus now. Manual control, nothing automated." He nodded, swallowing hard, eyes wide. Emily felt the weight of every life on board pressed down like a physical force. She couldn't fail. Not now, not ever. The storm continued to batter them, but Emily had stabilized the descent. The runway lights appeared faintly through sheets of rain and clouds, a distant, fragile promise of survival, but nothing was assured. Every second remained a battle against nature, against machinery, and against time itself. She exhaled slowly, focusing all energy on the final approach. Every micro-adjustment, every calculation, every instinct was now being tested to its limit. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, the aircraft shuddered, engines sputtering, wing groaning, fuel levels erratic. But for the first time, Emily sensed a fragile thread of hope. They were still flying. "Hold steady," she muttered, "almost there." And with that, the storm continued to rage. The aircraft flexed under immense stress, and Emily prepared for the approach that could either save them all or turn this nightmare into disaster. The plane shuddered violently again, a bone-jarring jolt that rattled the jump seat beneath Emily's hands. The metallic groan of the wing was now sharp and insistent, a terrifying reminder of just how fragile their aircraft had become. Rain pounded against the fuselage, slashing at the windows with relentless fury, lightning illuminating the chaos in stark, violent bursts. Emily's pulse hammered in her chest, yet her hands remained steady on the yoke, eyes locked on the instruments and the distant glimmer of the runway. "First officer, engines 2 and 3 are unstable," she said, voice tight but controlled. "Throttle asymmetry compensate manually. Hydraulics are still delayed. Keep the aircraft level at all costs." The first officer nodded, hands shaking slightly as he obeyed, voice tight with concentration. "Yes, ma'am. Leveling, adjusting trim." Emily exhaled, centering herself amid the chaos. She could feel the plane's subtle movements beneath her hands, the wings flexing dangerously, the fuselage groaning with every gust of wind. She had flown in combat situations that demanded split-second decisions, but nothing had prepared her for the combined terror of a structurally compromised plane, failing engines, unpredictable turbulence, and dozens of civilian lives depending entirely on her. Suddenly, through the static of the radio, a new voice cut in, crisp, military, and eerily familiar. "Flight 482, this is NORAD Combat Air Command. We are tracking your situation. We have verified a combat-trained pilot aboard. Military assets are on standby to escort and assist if required." Emily froze for a fraction of a second. NORAD, fighter jets. She had been out of active duty for years, yet the recognition in their voice and the immediacy of their offer was a lifeline. Still, she didn't allow herself relief. The storm was still raging, the aircraft was unstable, and her attention could not waver. "Understood," she replied, voice calm but taut. "We're maintaining manual control and preparing for emergency landing. Guidance appreciated." Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the violent turbulence, the rain that whipped across the fuselage like knives. Emily adjusted the throttles, micromanaging the controls, feeling the flex of the wings, anticipating the aircraft's response before instruments could even register. She was reading the plane like a living being, every vibration, every quiver, every sound telling her what needed correction. "Cabin, brace for extreme turbulence," she said over the intercom, keeping her voice calm. "Remain seated and secure. Fasten your seatbelts. Hold tight." Passengers gripped armrests, children whimpered, whispers of prayers filled the air. Emily's heart clenched briefly at their fear, but she forced herself to focus. Panic could kill more than the storm ever could. The first officer spoke again. "Left wing flexing, structural stress increasing. I don't know how long we can hold this." Emily's stomach tightened. "We'll hold it. Adjust trim manually every 2 seconds. Counterbalance with asymmetric thrust. Micromanage the yoke constantly. We survive by control and calculation, nothing else." She could feel the plane responding to her touch. Every micro-adjustment kept them aloft, despite failing engines, fluctuating fuel, and the storm's relentless assault. She exhaled slowly, willing herself to remain calm. Focus was survival. Panic was death. Outside, through the rain and lightning, she caught a glimpse of shadows streaking past, jet silhouettes. The fighters had arrived. Her pulse jumped, not with fear but with recognition. Military escorts could respond faster than any emergency crew on the ground, and their presence added a layer of protection and, strangely, reassurance. "Military jets inbound," she said calmly to the first officer. "They'll guide us if we lose control on final approach. Focus on stabilization. We're not done yet." Minutes dragged, each second stretching into an eternity. Emily's hands were numb from tension, her muscles taut, but she refused to release the controls. The plane lurched violently, a sickening twist that rattled instruments and shook the fuselage. She countered instantly, micromanaging every movement. The wings flexed dangerously, and she felt the faintest hint of panic pulse in her gut, but she refused to acknowledge it. Instinct and training ruled now. Then came a new, terrifying challenge. The runway lights, distant and faint, flickered under sheets of rain. Crosswinds were vicious. Gusts threatened to tip the plane sideways. Every passenger on board relied entirely on her to navigate this final stretch. "First officer, calculate wind drift constantly," she said. "I need real-time adjustments. Focus on micro-corrections for lateral stability. Manual control, nothing automated." He nodded, hands flying across controls, his eyes wide but determined. Emily could see the exhaustion etched into his face, mirroring her own. Lightning cracked again, blinding, followed by thunder that rattled the fuselage. Rain slashed sideways. Engines sputtered and groaned under the stress. Emily felt the left wing flex more violently than before. Structural failure seemed imminent, and every adjustment required precision beyond normal human reflex. "Brace for possible roll," she warned the first officer. "Adjust trim continuously, counterbalance with throttle. We do not allow panic to dictate the plane's response." He followed her orders perfectly, and together they coaxed the aircraft through the chaos. Each second was a battle, each micro-movement a decision between life and death. Then, through the roar of the storm, a voice crackled over the radio. It was the NORAD escort lead, calm and authoritative. "Flight 482, maintain current heading. We are positioned to guide you for a short approach. We'll advise altitude adjustments and crosswind compensation." Emily nodded, taking in the information while simultaneously keeping her eyes on instruments, the first officer, and the violently shuddering aircraft. The runway was still miles away, obscured by storm and darkness, but the guidance gave her a narrow thread of hope. "First officer, prepare for coordinated descent," she said. "We'll follow their vectoring and guidance, but final control stays with us. Understand?" He nodded, hands shaking but resolute. "Understood." The aircraft lurched again, violently. Emily's stomach dropped, every muscle tense, every nerve firing. The storm was unrelenting, and the structural groan from the wing had grown into a roar that echoed through the fuselage. She adjusted throttle, yoke, and trim with precision, feeling the aircraft respond just enough to stay in controlled flight. "Cabin, brace again," she said. "We are approaching emergency landing conditions. Hold tight, stay calm." Passengers gripped armrests, children whimpered, whispers of prayers filled the cabin. Emily's heart clenched, but she refused to think of them except in terms of survival. Every action, every micro-adjustment was focused on control, stability, and landing. The first officer called out updates. Engine 2 sputtering, hydraulic lag, wing flexing dangerously. Emily adjusted instantly, counteracting gusts, flex, and instability. The runway lights became more visible, faint but steady through the sheets of rain. "Final approach in 3 minutes," she whispered to herself, voice steady. "Almost there, stay focused, microadjust, don't falter." Lightning illuminated the storm one last time, revealing the churning chaos outside. The aircraft continued to groan, engines sputtered, fuel fluctuated, and structural stress intensified. But for the first time, Emily sensed a fragile thread of hope. They were still flying, still alive, still in control. "Stay sharp," she said to the first officer. "This is the last stage, manual control, full focus. Nothing automated, we survive by precision." Minutes stretched, the storm relentless, wind sheer threatening to rip control from their hands. But the aircraft responded to Emily's guidance, micro-adjustments, and sheer willpower. She felt the plane's heartbeat under her hands, fragile but alive. The runway was close now, visible through lightning and rain. Military fighters flanked them, guiding their approach. Emily exhaled slowly, tightening her grip on the yoke. The worst of the storm was still there, but the worst of the fight, controlled descent through turbulence, was almost over. Yet in the pit of her stomach, she knew the final approach would demand everything: precision, nerve, instinct, and courage. One misstep now could destroy the fragile balance they had fought so hard to maintain. She whispered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. "Almost there, just hold together, just one more step." And with that, the aircraft lurched violently, a reminder that the battle was far from over, and the climax of survival, courage, and skill was just ahead. The runway lights cut through the storm like faint, trembling beacons of hope. Emily's eyes locked on them, muscles taut, hands gripping the yoke as the aircraft shuddered violently under the assault of wind and turbulence. The metallic groan from the left wing had grown louder, sharper, ominous, but she refused to let it dominate her thoughts. Focus, precision, instinct, these were her only tools now. "First officer," she said, voice calm but firm, "final approach. All systems manual. Micromanage everything. Any deviation from my commands could be fatal. Understood?" He nodded, hands trembling slightly but poised on the controls. "Understood." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the plane's strained fuselage. Rain lashed across the cockpit windows like knives. Turbulence threw the aircraft violently, and the left wing groaned again, a bone-chilling warning. Emily adjusted throttle and trim instinctively, micromanaging the yoke with every ounce of training and instinct she possessed. "Crosswind compensation," she muttered under her breath. She calculated gusts and turbulence, factoring in the wing's compromised structure. One miscalculation now would rip the aircraft from the sky. The first officer called out engine updates. Engine 2 sputtering, Engine 3 stable, fuel dropping rapidly, hydraulics lagging. Emily barely acknowledged the numbers. She relied on feel, instincts, and split-second observation. Every vibration, every flex, every shudder told her more than any gauge. The plane had become an extension of her body, a living entity she guided with unwavering focus. "Cabin brace," she said over the intercom. "Final approach. Fasten seatbelts, secure children, hold tight. We are in emergency mode." Passengers clutched armrests. Some prayed silently, others whispered words of encouragement to children or partners. Emily's heart clenched briefly, but she couldn't afford distraction. The storm, the aircraft, the compromised wing, and their lives all depended entirely on control, anticipation, and precision. The first NORAD fighter jet streaked past, illuminating the runway with navigational lights. Emily's pulse jumped, relief mixed with tension. The military escort could provide guidance if she lost control on approach, but she couldn't rely on them. This landing, this survival, rested entirely in her hands. "First officer, maintain asymmetric thrust," she said. "Microadjust trim every 2 seconds. We compensate for wing flex manually. Follow my instructions to the letter." He nodded, voice tight, hands moving with precision. The aircraft lurched violently, bowing to the wind's assault. Emily countered instantly, predicting every flex, every gust, every quiver. Her training, instincts, and raw focus merged into one seamless flow. Lightning illuminated the storm once more, a jagged, blinding flash revealing sheets of rain and violent turbulence. The fuselage groaned, engines sputtered, fuel warnings flashed, and the left wing flexed dangerously. Emily adjusted the controls with micro-precision, feeling the plane respond, resisting gravity, resisting destruction, resisting chaos. The runway drew nearer. Emily's eyes alternated between instruments, horizon, and storm. Every second, every adjustment was critical. She calculated wind drift, compensating for turbulence while considering structural weakness. One wrong input could rip the wing or send the aircraft spinning. "First officer, final alignment with runway," she said. "Use microcorrections only. We land as one unit. Nothing sudden, every movement counts." He followed, hands moving deftly, eyes wide but focused. Emily could feel the first officer's trust and the fear behind it. She couldn't falter. Lives rested in her hands. The aircraft bucked violently as a sudden gust struck the left wing. Emily countered instantly, throttling engine one slightly, adjusting trim, micromanaging the yoke. The wing groaned, screaming metal under stress. She gritted her teeth, refusing to allow panic. Control, precision, instinct. That was all. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, reducing visibility. Lightning illuminated the turbulent clouds above, wind slashing across the fuselage. The runway lights flickered, distant and fragile. Emily exhaled, muscles taut, mind entirely focused. "Cabin, remain calm," she said. "We are moments from landing. Fasten belts, secure yourself, stay down, brace for turbulence." Passengers gripped armrests, some whispering prayers, some holding children tightly. Emily felt their fear, but she didn't allow herself distraction. She had to remain laser-focused. The first officer called out updates. Engine 2 sputtering, hydraulic delay, fuel dropping rapidly. Emily adjusted throttle and trim instantly. She felt the aircraft respond to her touch, micromanaging every subtle movement. She anticipated the wings flex before it happened, countering every dangerous tilt. The NORAD jets provided intermittent guidance, signaling optimal heading, speed adjustments, and wind compensation. Emily followed precisely, using their input to fine-tune her own micro-adjustments. The runway lights were now clearer, visible through the rain and turbulence, but the danger had not abated. Another violent gust slammed into the aircraft, the left wing groaning like it might fail. Emily countered, adjusting throttle, trim, and yoke input with surgical precision. The first officer mirrored her actions, hands steady, eyes wide. Every movement mattered. Every fraction of a second could mean life or death. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "Almost there, just a few more seconds, hold together." Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the storm, the runway, and the violently shaking aircraft. Rain lashed the fuselage. The engine sputtered, fuel levels fluctuated wildly, and the groaning wing flexed dangerously. Emily's heart pounded, adrenaline surged, but she refused to panic. Instinct and skill dominated every micro-adjustment. "First officer, maintain full focus," she said. "This is the final stretch. Microcorrect for wind, flex, and turbulence. Landing is imminent, nothing automated. Every action counts." The plane lurched violently again, bowing to the wind, but Emily guided it with incredible precision. The runway lights grew closer, brighter, yet the turbulence was relentless. Each gust threatened to tip the aircraft sideways, but she countered instantly. Micro-adjustment, throttle, trim, yoke, each motion a lifeline. "Cabin brace, landing in moments," she said over the intercom. "Stay seated, secure, calm." Passengers gripped seats, some screaming, others silent in fear. Emily's heart ached for them, but there was no room for empathy beyond calculated action. Precision was survival. Control was life. Instinct was their only chance. The runway was near now, and the NORAD jets flanked them, guiding alignment and providing a buffer against potential hazards. Emily could see every gust, every tilt, every micro-shift in the wind and plane. She adjusted instantly, anticipating the wing's next groan, throttling engines to maintain lift, micromanaging trim and yoke. "First officer, final descent," she said. "Stay steady. Nothing sudden, micro-adjust only, brace for landing." The aircraft lurched violently, but Emily's hands were steady, her instincts razor-sharp. She guided the plane, countering every gust, every flex, every shudder. The runway was within sight. The storm was still present, but they were aligned, descending steadily, surviving against impossible odds. She whispered under her breath, "Almost there, almost there." And with that, the aircraft shuddered violently one last time, wings flexing dangerously, engines sputtering, turbulence raging. But Emily's hands never wavered. She was ready to bring them home, to defy the storm, the failing systems, and the fragile aircraft that still clung to life. The runway stretched ahead like a fragile thread of light, cutting through sheets of rain and swirling storm clouds. Emily's hands were steady on the yoke, every muscle taut, every nerve alert. The metallic groan from the left wing had reached a terrifying crescendo, a constant reminder that one miscalculation could rip the aircraft from the sky. The engine sputtered erratically, fuel was critically low, and the storm continued to batter them with unrelenting force. Yet, for all the chaos, Emily's mind was razor-focused. "First officer," she said, voice calm but commanding, "final alignment. Micro-adjust only. Nothing sudden. This is our last window. Stay with me." He nodded, hands poised on the controls, eyes wide but concentrated. The tension in the cockpit was almost unbearable, but both of them were locked into a rhythm of life and survival, a dance with the storm and a fragile metal bird that refused to die. Lightning split the sky, momentarily blinding them, revealing the storm's raw, violent beauty. The fuselage shuddered violently, the left wing groaned in protest, and the wind threatened to roll them onto their side. Emily adjusted throttle and trim instinctively, micromanaging every input. Every vibration was data, every quiver was information. She was in perfect sync with the aircraft. "Cabin brace," she said firmly over the intercom. "Landing imminent. Fasten seatbelts. Hold tight. We are moments from the runway." Passengers clutched armrests, some crying silently, some holding their children, some muttering prayers. Emily felt the weight of their fear pressing on her like a tangible force, but she couldn't afford emotion, only precision. The first NORAD fighter jet streaked past, illuminating the runway with navigational lights. Emily's pulse jumped. The military escort was a lifeline, able to guide them and alert emergency crews if anything went wrong. She allowed herself a fleeting recognition of relief before pushing it aside. This landing depended entirely on her. "Crosswind gusts increasing," she muttered, eyes scanning the storm outside. She adjusted the throttles, micromanaging trim and yoke, countering every gust, every shift of the aircraft, every dangerous tilt. The left wing groaned again, sharper this time, metal protesting under stress. "First officer, hold steady. Microcorrect only. We cannot allow abrupt movements. The wing will not forgive mistakes." He nodded, swallowing hard, hands trembling slightly but precise. Every input was critical, every micro-adjustment a lifeline. The runway lights grew closer, brighter, a fragile beacon through the violent storm. Emily calculated wind drift, compensating for crosswinds while accounting for the wing's compromised structure. Each adjustment was a delicate balance, a fight against gravity, turbulence, and failing systems. "Cabin, remain calm," she said again. "We are moments from landing. Stay seated, fasten belts, brace for impact if necessary." Passengers gripped seats, whispered prayers, some holding children tightly. Emily's stomach clenched at the fear in their eyes, but she couldn't let it reach her. Panic would ruin everything. Only control, instinct, and skill would keep them alive. The first officer called out updates. Engine 2 sputtering, fuel dangerously low, hydraulic lag persisting. Emily adjusted instantly, micromanaging throttle, trim, and yoke input. The aircraft responded to her touch, shivering violently under stress, but she guided it toward the runway with extraordinary precision. Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the storm and runway, rain cutting sideways across the windows. The plane lurched violently, but Emily countered instantly, maintaining alignment with the runway. Every second was a battle. Every motion counted. "Prepare for landing flare," she said softly but firmly. 3 seconds to touchdown, micro-adjust throttle, micro-adjust trim, hold yoke steady. The runway grew closer. Gusts slammed the aircraft and the left wing groaned louder, threatening structural failure. Emily adjusted, micromanaging the yoke, compensating for turbulence, flex, and asymmetric thrust. The first officer mirrored her actions, precise, focused, hands steady despite fear. "Brace," she yelled over the intercom. "Touchdown imminent." The plane shuddered violently as the wheels kissed the runway. Rain and wind slammed against the fuselage, the left wing groaning sharply, protesting every second of their descent. Emily's hands were steady, guiding the plane through the flare, absorbing every micro-movement, keeping the aircraft aligned, keeping it alive. The tires met the runway fully, skidding slightly in the slick rain. Emily countered instantly, micro-adjusting rudder and yoke, keeping the aircraft straight. Every inch mattered. The left wing groaned under the stress of crosswinds, yet she held control, micromanaging throttle to maintain stability. The first officer called out updates frantically but efficiently, adjusting as Emily directed. They were both fully aware. Any sudden movement, any misjudgment now, could rip the wing or spin the plane into disaster. Emergency lights along the runway reflected off the wet tarmac, and she saw first responders standing ready, their vehicles' lights flashing. They were almost safe, but Emily didn't relax. Not yet. Not until every wheel had rolled to a complete stop. The plane skidded slightly again in crosswind gusts. Emily countered immediately, yoke micro-adjustments, rudder corrections, throttle precision. The left wing groaned, almost in pain, but it held. Inch by inch, they moved forward. "Keep control," she muttered, teeth clenched. "Steady, steady, steady." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the aircraft slowed. The groans of the wing faded as it began rolling toward a complete stop. Emily maintained micro-control until the nose wheel touched safely. She exhaled slowly, relief and exhaustion washing over her in a delayed wave. The plane rolled fully onto the tarmac, engines idling, emergency vehicles flanking them. Emily finally allowed herself to look at the first officer. His eyes were wide, his face pale, but there was awe and relief there. He nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished. Passengers began to clap softly, some crying, others holding children, others still silent, processing the terror they had endured. Emily felt a surge of emotion, but she pushed it aside, focusing on guiding the aircraft to a full stop at the designated parking area. The NORAD fighter jets circled above, then slowly pulled away. They had been witnesses, guides, and backup, but Emily had done this. She had flown a damaged aircraft through a storm, stabilized it manually, managed failing engines and structural stress, and landed it safely. Every life on board owed her their survival. The aircraft rolled to a stop. Silence filled the cabin for a moment, broken only by shallow breaths, the hum of idling engines and distant storm winds. Then, as the gravity of survival sank in, the cabin erupted, cheers, tears, whispers of disbelief and gratitude. Emily remained at the controls for a moment longer, hands steady, mind still calculating. Only when the first officer guided her to park completely did she allow herself to exhale fully. Emergency personnel rushed forward. Passengers began disembarking slowly, many hugging, many crying. Emily's eyes scanned the cabin one last time. Every single person had survived. Against impossible odds, she had guided them through chaos, storm, and failure. She had done what seemed unthinkable. The first officer finally looked at her, voice breaking with awe. "Ma'am, you saved us all, every single life. I don't even have words." Emily shook her head slightly, fatigue and relief mingling. "We survived because we stayed calm, focused, and trusted the plane, and each other," she said. Outside, the storm still raged, lightning flashing over distant clouds, rain pounding the tarmac. But inside, in the fragile calm of survival, a hero emerged, not in medals or accolades, but in action, instinct, and courage. Emily Ward, who had boarded as just another passenger sleeping in 9A, had become the guardian of dozens of lives, a combat pilot rising from civilian obscurity to extraordinary heroism. As emergency crews checked the aircraft and passengers stepped into relative safety, one thing was clear: this flight would be remembered. Not for the storm, not for the failing systems, not for the near catastrophe, but for the woman who, against all odds, turned disaster into survival. And as she finally unbuckled her seatbelt, standing to leave the cockpit, Emily allowed herself the smallest, most human smile, a mix of exhaustion, relief, and the unspoken acknowledgement that some moments define a life forever. The storm would fade, the headlines would come, and history would remember the flight. But for now, Emily simply exhaled, the weight of the world lifted just slightly, knowing she had done the impossible and saved every single life aboard.